Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a very quick side-by-side review and comparison of the Samsung Galaxy S20 5G and the Samsung Galaxy S9. Now before we jump into the video, as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment with any questions below. I'll be more than happy to help out in any way I can. Now, as we get started, I'm going to be going with the S20 first. I've had this for about a week now, coming from an S9. The S20 was the built for Fi model, which is Google Fi's wireless service. I always recommend doing your own due diligence and making sure that the hardware specs on the device you're looking for, if you're not getting the unlocked version, just make sure that there are no hardware variations, especially with the introduction of a new eSIM card slot and some of these models almost having different sub-models. For example, one may have different RAM when comparing, for example, the S20 Ultra. There's a 12 gig and a 16 gig RAM setup. So just again, make sure you're looking into them, but I'm going to be comparing the base model of both of these. So jumping into the S20, this is going to be the S20 5G. So it's not the Fan Edition or the Plus or anything like that. So a couple of things that you'll notice right off the bat. I do have the same screen protector on both, or the closest I could get, and then the exact same Spigen case. Like Spigen, it's a pretty solid product overall. It's like 15-20 bucks, and honestly, it's served me well over the years. Now, one of the first things you'll notice is the circle right here. That's your fingerprint scanner. It's not always present if you have the screen protector off. However, if you're going to get a tempered glass screen protector, I would highly recommend making sure you're upgrading to one that will not actually show this. The reviews for this screen protector is one of the ballistic screen protectors from Amazon. It's like $15. They said this goes away over time. I've had it on here about 8 to 10 days and it's still there, so I'll probably be changing that out. But just to let you know, that is why that is there. So if you want more details on the actual S20 and the more in-depth review comparing the different models, check out the link in the description below. I have a much more in-depth review, but we're just going to be comparing base models. So we'll run through specs very, very quickly and then just give you an idea of what it's like to own both of these. Starting off with price, the S20 is coming in at about $999.99. However, with us just passing Black Friday, coming up to Christmas, and then New Year's, these are probably going to be on sale for a while. I've seen these on Google Fi's website for $4.99 to $5.99, depending on the service that you get. And again, make sure you're reading the fine print there before checkout. On Samsung's website, I've seen it upwards of, I think, $489.99. Again, read the fine print. They do factor in a couple different factors. They have discount programs, and you will also notice that they have a trade-in program to trade in your old device. And the price may vary based on, again, models you get, but this is the 128 gig standard model. So looking over the specs, so for the S20 itself, you will note that this has a slightly larger screen and much better screen resolution and overall quality. So this is a 6.2-inch display measured diagonally, and it is a Quad HD Plus Dynamic AMOLED 2X Infinity-O display. That honestly is a mouthful. What we're essentially looking at is 120 Hz refresh rate, which is one of the biggest changes with this device. It makes a huge difference for gaming and just general day-to-day use. And we are also looking at a 563 pixel per inch density. Now, as far as the hardware itself, starting off with cameras, one of the biggest things that differentiates the devices, this has a 10 megapixel selfie camera, and it does have 3 cameras on the back, which you'll notice right out of the box. Primary difference between these 3, so you will note that you have up top your 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, followed by your 12 megapixel wide angle, and then your 64 megapixel telephoto camera. Now, I go into more detail on this in the actual in-depth S20 review, but what we're looking at is a hybrid optic zoom 3x, and then what they've been advertising pretty heavily, which is your super resolution zoom up to 30x. That's that SpaceX zoom. Now, as far as the additional setup on the device itself, so one of the other differences between the two is the onboard RAM and the processor itself. So for video recording, you'll notice on the S20 that you have a 1080p Full HD video recording at 60 frames per second. So this does have slow motion 1080p video support at 240 frames per second. This does also support 4K Ultra HD video recording at 60 frames per second and 8K video recording at 24 frames per second. So we're actually upgrading to 8K for this. Now, performance between the devices, this one has a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, which has honestly been pretty solid for me. Pretty heavy usage. It'll most likely get the average person through their typical day. And then you will notice right out of the box, you have your settings here. You have your HD, full HD, and WQHD. So we're going, really the only two you're probably going to be using are right here. So we have your 2400 by 1080 and your 3200 by 1440. Out of the box, you're in the middle because that's kind of the best bang for your buck as far as overall quality mixed with extended battery life. This does support super fast charging as opposed to the fast charging on the S9. So there is fast wireless charging 2.0 and there is an alternate charger. What that means is you're getting about 25 watt charging from your standard charger that comes out of the box, but they do have the 45 watt charging as well to charge it even quicker. You'll notice if you plug it into other chargers, there's a fast charging mode on this device that you would have to enable. Otherwise, you're just going with slow charging and super fast charging. Now, last thing to cover, this one does have the 5G support. It still supports the LTE and standard Wi-Fi ranges, and it does have the Bluetooth 5.0, so nothing too crazy there. Now on board, this does have a 12 gig RAM, which is pretty much standard, although they do have models with 8 and 16. And then there is 128 gig internal storage, which is double the stock storage for the S20 or the S9, I apologize, on pretty much all accounts. So you do have your single SIM model, dual SIM model, and you do have a micro SD card slot and Android 10.0 out of the box. Audio quality on this is incredible as well. And you do have your standard IP68 rating. So as far as the processor, which is the only other really big difference, you do have your 64-bit octa-core processor, max speed of 2.7 gigahertz. So pretty fast, and honestly, all of the hardware is paired very, very well for this device. So next up, we are going to jump over to the S9, pulling up same settings. You'll notice you have your full HD at 2220 by 1080 pixels, jumping up to 2960 by 1440. So on this device, you will notice a couple of changes. First off, your camera. So the front camera is coming in at 8 megapixels, so not too much worse than the S20 itself. And then the camera resolution on the rear is a 12 megapixel camera, and you will notice that there's a pretty big difference right off the bat. Not only on the screen resolution and the pixel density, when you open up the camera on both, this is still an incredible camera overall, but when you're using it, you will notice that when you're pairing a camera that is not as good with a screen that is not as good to the newer S20 model, it's almost like you have those 2 points kind of going against it for the S9. So a couple other details on this. You have your UHD 4K, which is going to be at 60 frames per second. Internal RAM, 46 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs base storage. Does have a micro SD support as well. But on the storage front, RAM and overall onboard memory is pretty much doubled in size for the S20. And one of the other differences, the S20 does have the wireless power sharing, so anything that can have not every device, but most devices that have wireless charging, you can use your S20 to charge those devices. Both have the typical NFC capability. They both have USB Type-C, although this is standard fast charging. Due to the battery being a little bit smaller, it does charge about the same speed because this is a 3,000 milliamp hour battery. So a little bit of a difference there. Again, the 4K video recording on this is pretty solid. So I don't think that you're going to notice much of a difference depending on what type of screen you view this on. Now, I will tell you overall, the S20 blows this out of the water completely. So the S9, as far as the actual processor in it, we are looking at an octa-core, maxing at about 2.7 gigahertz, if I'm not mistaken. Although I believe there may be more than one actual processor setup, but we're looking at the again, like the octa-core 2.7 gigahertz. So this one is going to be a little bit slower just because it is an older processor. Now, comparing these two side by side. So the S9 I've been using for a while. Battery life has dropped pretty substantially over the course of 2 years or so. And there are already rumors of the S9 not getting the newest Android 11.0 update. And honestly, due to the chipset, I think that's just a little bit hard to kind of stomach for a device that hasn't been around terribly long. So when we open up the camera, double tapping the power button onto the 2, you will notice a pretty substantial difference. We'll take these off. I'm honestly just going to, I'll use this one as a frame of reference just for the optical zoom. So when we compare the zoom on the S9, for example, we'll just turn this sideways, make it a little easier. So this is the S9. When you're zooming in, you notice right off the back you have to change your mode. So we will set it to auto. We can zoom, it has 8x zoom. Overall quality is relatively decent, again, for something of this caliber. And you zoom out to your standard 1x zoom. Now, setting this off to the side, you will notice this is going to be the S20. It's pretty much same settings, stock out of the box, but you will see your 30x space zoom, and you'll see what looks like crosshairs up here, giving you a larger piece of the puzzle, so to speak. So it'll tell you what exactly you're zooming in on. But if you zoom out even to the same 8x, you'll notice a much higher quality image. And then one other difference you'll notice, if I point this straight down and I zoom out, you'll get a much bigger picture because you have that half-x zoom. So this is that wide angle lens. With the S9 all the way out, you'll see side by side a pretty big difference. So this one, it just covers so much more. I'll put the S9 right here and you'll see that it gets it in the shot. If I were to put the S20 in the exact same spot and zoom out all the way, this is the general picture that you're going to get. So it's a pretty sizable difference, as well as the overall difference between the two as far as the general camera quality. So overall, between the two, especially at the price point with the S9 still floating between $300 to $500, depending on where you find it, I would highly, highly recommend going with the standard S20 right now. I think it's easy to justify the $100 to $200 difference, especially with what's included with the device itself. One primary difference, which I think everyone's going to get used to at some point, but the only other difference as far as charging ports, you'll notice that the S9 still has the standard 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, whereas this device has officially removed that and we are looking at the Type-C. But because the S20 comes with the AKG headphones, they do have the Type-C cord built in. So between the two, I would highly recommend, personally, getting the S20. I think that you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, especially on the overall specs between the two. And just to compare video quality, what I'm going to be doing is I'm recording this video on an S9 to show you what video quality looks like with essentially all settings set to stock. And then I will be doing an S9 review where I will run that on the S20 so you can see what that higher quality video looks like. I'll put the link to that in the description as well. Again, if you have any questions, reach out and let me know, drop a comment below, and don't forget to check out the channel for new content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.